Marilyn and I started out learning the dance routines first.
By the time Marilyn Monroe moved into her Brentwood home in 1962, she believed she was starting over. No studio contracts hanging over her head. No husband. Just a quiet house in the hills that she hoped would finally feel like her own. She even marked the entrance with a phrase that spoke of endings and journeys fulfilled, but history had other plans. After her sudden death, the home slipped into silence, until years later, when renovations uncovered details that sent shockwaves through Hollywood lore. Suddenly, the walls of Marilyn's final refuge seemed to hold secrets no one was meant to find. What was discovered inside that house reopened decades-old theories and cast her final months in a far more unsettling light. And even now, the fate of that home and what it represents remains deeply contested. The making of Marilyn's pain. On June 1, 1926, a baby girl named Norma Jean entered the world, long before anyone would ever call her Marilyn Monroe. And from the very beginning, her life was already complicated. Her mother, Gladys Mortensen, had been through a divorce and a painful separation before Norma was even born. In the moral climate of the 1920s, that meant Norma was labeled illegitimate, and that label quietly shaped how the world treated her. But the real trouble wasn't society. It was home. Norma's father was absent, and her mother simply wasn't equipped to raise a child alone. Gladys was overwhelmed by money problems and battling serious mental illness. Eventually, she made the heartbreaking decision to place her daughter into foster care. Norma's first home was with a strict religious couple called the Bollanders. While they provided structure, it was not warmth. Meanwhile, Gladys stayed on the edges of her daughter's life, drifting through low-paying jobs around Hollywood, barely staying afloat. When Norma was about 7, Gladys believed she was finally ready to be a mother. She brought Norma back, got into a government-assisted housing program, bought a small house, and tried to build something stable. For a brief moment, it looked like a fresh start. But the stability didn't last. Gladys was fragile, and tragedy pushed her over the edge. Her teenage son from a previous marriage died suddenly. Not long after that, she learned that her own father had taken his life. Then, she lost her job. The grief stacked up faster than she could process it. Instead of bringing Gladys closer to her daughter, the pain twisted into resentment. Norma became a reminder of what was still alive when everything else had been taken away. Gladys's behavior became erratic and frightening, and by 1934, when Norma was just 8 years old, authorities intervened. Gladys was hospitalized and diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Norma was left behind and sent back into the foster care system. From there, her childhood unraveled completely. She passed through an orphanage and then through roughly a dozen foster homes. She never stayed long enough to feel safe. She never stayed long enough to feel wanted. And then the neglect turned into something far worse. In one foster home, a man who was supposed to protect her sexually abused her. She was 10 years old. The trauma changed her overnight. Her school performance collapsed. She developed a severe stutter. The little girl, who had already been quiet, became even more withdrawn. The abuse didn't end there. In another home, she was assaulted behind a barn. In another, she was attacked by the boyfriend of a foster sibling. There was no safe place, no adult who truly stepped in, no moment where someone finally said enough. By the time she was 16, the last family she lived with decided to move out of state without her. She was given a choice that wasn't really a choice at all: return to the orphanage or find a way to survive on her own. She chose survival. On June 19, 1942, she married a neighbor's son, James Dougherty. It wasn't a love story. It was an escape plan. Marriage was the only way she could legally avoid being sent back into the system. The cost was enormous. She dropped out of high school at 16 and became a wife before she had even figured out who she was. She followed James to Catalina Island when he joined the Marines. There, she filled her days with workouts, swimming, surfing, and anything else that could distract her from how empty she felt. She later described that marriage as suffocating boredom. While working at a munitions factory during the war, a photographer noticed her and took a few pictures. They weren't used, but something inside her clicked. She realized she wanted more than safety. She wanted a different life. So she left. By 1945, she had ended the marriage and started working as a model. It was a bold move, especially for a young woman with no money, no family support, and no safety net. But for the first time, the direction of her life was her own. Then her past walked back in. In 1946, Gladys reappeared after another hospital stay. She was unstable, unemployed, and emotionally distant. She dressed in a nurse's uniform for no clear reason and treated her daughter with coldness rather than affection. Then she vanished again, running off to marry a man who was already married. At the same time, Norma Jean was divorcing, struggling financially, and trying to break into an industry that was brutal to young women. She became obsessed with reshaping herself. She exercised relentlessly. She lost weight. She dyed her auburn hair blonde. She was no longer trying to survive. She was trying to transform. Hollywood did not open its doors easily. She landed tiny roles, often uncredited. Sometimes her scenes were cut entirely. She was invisible on screen, even as people off-screen noticed her. She dated Charlie Chaplin's son. The relationship ended in chaos. She became entangled with powerful studio men who treated access to acting work like a transaction for her body. When she refused one of those arrangements, she lost her contract and disappeared from the industry for months. By 1948, she finally caught a small break with a role in Ladies of the Chorus. It wasn't stardom, but it was progress. Still, progress didn't pay rent. By 1949, she was broke again. And desperate people make desperate decisions. She agreed to pose for nude photographs, not knowing those images would follow her for the rest of her life. The woman behind the fantasy. By 1950, Marilyn Monroe was no longer chasing fame in theory. She was chasing it in practice, with her whole body and her whole life. Under the guidance of her agent, she began reshaping herself in ways that were extreme, even by Hollywood standards. Her teeth were altered so they would sit differently. She used hormone-based creams to lighten her skin tone. She underwent cosmetic surgery to refine the tip of her nose and add shape to her chin. Each change was painful, expensive, and permanent. But she accepted all of it as part of the price of becoming a star. One of those beauty routines came with an unexpected cost. The skin treatments caused soft, pale hair to grow across her face. It looked like a faint beard, but she refused to stop the treatment anyway. To Marilyn, the look mattered more than the discomfort. She was building herself piece by piece. Her career finally began to move when she appeared in All About Eve as Miss Caswell. Audiences loved her instantly. Behind the scenes, though, Marilyn was unraveling. She prepared obsessively, rehearsing for hours, but the moment the camera rolled, anxiety would wipe her mind clean. Lines vanished. Scenes had to be repeated again and again. She was convinced she was failing, even while everyone else saw her as magnetic. Her vulnerability only made her more captivating, especially to the men around her. That attention caused tension on set. One co-star's wife, a famous and glamorous social figure, began appearing constantly, clearly uneasy about Marilyn's presence. It was an early sign that Marilyn had become more than just another actress. She had become a disturbance. Over the next few years, she worked at a relentless pace, appearing in 16 films in 4 years. The workload drained her physically and mentally. Right before one audition, she admitted to her acting coach that she was hearing voices. It was a quiet warning sign that something deeper was beginning to fracture. Then came a devastating loss. Marilyn had been romantically involved with her agent, Johnny Hyde, who was also her closest emotional support. When he died suddenly of a heart attack, she collapsed into grief. She cried for days. At his funeral, she reportedly screamed his name. Not long afterward, her acting coach found her unconscious in her apartment with dozens of sleeping pills in her mouth. She survived, but the moment marked the beginning of a pattern of self-destructive episodes that would follow her for years. At the same time, her career reached a turning point with Clash by Night. It should have been her triumphant breakout. Instead, reporters uncovered nude photographs she had taken years earlier out of financial desperation. The media frenzy exploded. Overnight, Marilyn became famous not for her talent, but for a scandal. Rather than retreat, she leaned into it. When asked about the photos, she responded with humor and confidence, reframing the narrative before it could crush her. The scandal transformed her into a symbol, a screen siren, and Hollywood embraced the image. Privately, though, her life was collapsing. She reached out to the man she believed was her biological father, hoping for connection. He rejected her coldly and told her to call his lawyer. The rejection cut deeply. It reinforced a wound that had followed her since childhood, the feeling that she was unwanted. By 1952, her health began to fail. She suffered from endometriosis, a painful and poorly understood condition at the time. Surgery became necessary. Terrified of losing her ability to have children, she taped a note to her stomach begging the surgeon not to remove her ovaries. Motherhood mattered to her deeply, even as her life became increasingly unstable. Publicly, everything looked perfect. By 1953, she was a full-fledged star, headlining major films and dominating the box office. Yet, she was underpaid and overworked. In one of her biggest movies, she earned only a fraction of what her co-star made. The studio pushed her into a narrow role, the blonde bombshell, the beautiful fool. Marilyn hated it. She was intelligent, curious, and deeply introspective. But she understood the system. She played the part while quietly resenting it, occasionally slipping her real voice into her performances. Her insecurity grew as her fame grew. She became dependent on her acting coach and demanded endless retakes of scenes. Directors found her difficult. Audiences found her mesmerizing. Her personal life moved just as fast. She was introduced to baseball star Joe DiMaggio, and they married quickly. The relationship was doomed from the start. He wanted a quiet domestic life. She wanted movement, growth, and purpose. His jealousy clashed violently with her public image. That tension reached its peak during the filming of a now famous scene where air from a subway grate lifted her dress in front of a cheering crowd. Joe watched from the sidelines, furious and humiliated. Later that night, their argument turned physical. The next morning, Marilyn arrived on set bruised. Despite the violence, she still dreamed of having a child with him. But her medical condition made pregnancy risky, and the stress of the marriage only made things worse. Behind the scenes, Marilyn was gentle, shy, and emotionally open. She bonded more easily with animals than with executives. She preferred quiet moments to glamorous parties. The world saw a fantasy. The people closest to her saw someone fragile and kind. After only 9 months, she ended the marriage, citing emotional cruelty. She wept openly when the divorce became public. Joe claimed he still loved her, but his behavior became obsessive. He followed her, watched her, monitored her life from a distance, unable to let go. By 1954, Joe DiMaggio's fixation on Marilyn had crossed the line into something unhealthy and invasive. He hired a private investigator to follow her, convinced he would catch her with another man. In one almost absurd mistake, the investigator even broke into the wrong apartment, terrifying an unrelated middle-aged woman instead of finding Marilyn. It was a small incident, but it showed just how far DiMaggio had drifted from reality. Marilyn, meanwhile, was trying to move forward. She was linked romantically to Marlon Brando, the most exciting young actor of the moment. And for the first time in a while, her personal life seemed to be pointing somewhere new. That same year, she also revealed a very different side of herself. When segregation kept jazz legend Ella Fitzgerald from performing at elite Los Angeles nightclubs, Marilyn used her star power to intervene. She promised to sit in the front row every night if the club hired Ella. The club agreed, the performances sold out, and Ella's career gained a major boost. It was a quiet but powerful act of solidarity that said more about Marilyn than any headline ever could. In 1956, Marilyn surprised the world again by marrying playwright Arthur Miller. He left his wife to be with her, and the public was fascinated by the pairing of America's biggest movie star and one of its most serious literary figures. That same year, Marilyn fired her controlling acting coach and legally changed her name from Norma Jean to Marilyn Monroe, finally making her public identity official. But the marriage was troubled almost from the start. Miller privately wrote cruel things about her, calling her disappointing and embarrassing. Marilyn eventually discovered his journal, and what she read devastated her. Whether he meant for her to see it or not, the emotional damage was done. As she filmed The Prince and The Showgirl, her distress became visible. Her weight fluctuated so much that her costumes had to be altered constantly. Tension with her co-star and director grew intense, especially when he dismissed her with a remark that reduced her to nothing more than a body. It struck directly at her deepest fear, that she would never be seen as a serious artist. Between 1956 and 1958, Marilyn became pregnant 3 times. She lost 2 pregnancies to miscarriage and 1 to an ectopic pregnancy. After the 3rd loss, she quietly accepted that motherhood might never happen for her. It was one of the deepest heartbreaks of her life. In 1958, she began filming Some Like It Hot. The finished film was joyful and beloved. The production itself was chaotic. Marilyn relied heavily on medication to sleep and function, which made her unreliable on set. Simple lines took dozens of takes. The crew grew frustrated and resentful, and she felt the rejection deeply. She retreated further into herself, sometimes refusing to leave her trailer, sometimes breaking down in tears in front of everyone. Cruel remarks from co-stars and public criticism from the director only worsened her emotional state. By the end of filming, her behavior had cost the studio a significant amount of money, and her reputation as difficult began to overshadow her talent. Studios became hesitant to hire her. She even lost the chance to star in major projects because executives feared she would be too hard to manage. Yet even during this period, her kindness never disappeared. When she overheard a crew member struggling to pay for his wife's funeral, she quietly arranged for him to receive the money he needed, anonymously and without taking credit. Her marriage to Arthur Miller was collapsing. She felt unloved and isolated, and she began an affair with her co-star, Yves Montand. The relationship was brief and complicated, and like so many things in her life, it ended in quiet tragedy. Then came The Misfits, a film that brought together too many fragile people at once. The director struggled with alcoholism. Several of the stars battled addiction and mental illness. And the script was written by Miller himself, forcing the collapsing couple to work together daily in the desert heat. Miller had hoped the project would save their marriage. Instead, it destroyed what was left of it. They stopped living together, then stopped speaking at all. Communication went through intermediaries. Miller openly pursued another woman on set. He also made Marilyn's work harder by changing her lines at the last minute, knowing how much that destabilized her. During this time, Marilyn's mental health deteriorated rapidly. She admitted to hearing voices. She began taking dangerous amounts of sleeping pills. She felt lost, frightened, and increasingly alone. One bright spot was her bond with Clark Gable, who treated her with patience and respect. When he died shortly after filming ended, she was devastated. In November 1960, Marilyn and Arthur Miller divorced. Not long after that, she quietly admitted to friends that she had thought about ending her life. Instead of help, her psychoanalyst had her committed against her will. What was meant to be rest turned into something terrifying. She felt stripped of dignity, trapped and powerless. And the letters she wrote during that time are filled with fear, shame, and despair. Eventually, Joe DiMaggio stepped in and helped get her out when she needed someone most. And as if her life wasn't already spiraling in every direction, she was also beginning to fix her attention on the most powerful man in the country, the president himself. The final days of a legend. In May of 1962, Marilyn Monroe stepped onto the stage at Madison Square Garden and sang a soft, breathy version of Happy Birthday to President John F. Kennedy. The moment instantly became part of American pop culture, and it also ignited a firestorm of rumors about what kind of relationship the movie star and the president really had. The performance itself was unforgettable, but the visual was just as powerful. Marilyn wore a skin-toned gown covered in thousands of tiny rhinestones, so tight that it had to be sewn onto her body. Under the bright stage lights, the dress shimmered like bare skin. For a brief moment, the audience genuinely thought she was naked. The reaction was electric, and the image burned itself into history. Behind the spectacle, however, was a woman whose private life was growing more complicated by the day. Many historians now agree that Marilyn and President Kennedy were more than casual acquaintances. Their relationship, however, was never simple, and it never stood a real chance of becoming something stable. Adding to the emotional chaos, Marilyn was also spending time with the president's younger brother, Robert Kennedy. The overlapping relationships only deepened the sense that her personal life was spinning further out of control. Publicly, Marilyn still embodied glamour and sensual confidence. Privately, her behavior was often strange and fragile. She was known around the studios for walking around unclothed, giving interviews without getting dressed, and sometimes leaving her home wearing nothing but a long coat. These moments were treated as charming eccentricities by the press, but in reality, they were signs of someone who had lost her sense of boundaries and stability. By the early 1960s, her mental health had reached a dangerous low point. On her worst days, she barely had the energy to sit up in bed. Her makeup artist later recalled applying her makeup while she lay motionless, staring at the ceiling, trying to gather enough strength just to face the day. Still, Marilyn pushed herself to keep working. She signed on to a new film called Something's Got to Give, unaware it would become her final project. But the strain was too much. She missed rehearsals, arrived late, and disappeared for long stretches. Eventually, the studio fired her, frustrated by delays and rising costs. Yet even then, her star power was undeniable. The studio quickly offered her a new contract, recognizing that she was still one of the most bankable names in the world. Tragically, she would never return to the set to use it. One of the last people to spend time with her was a young actor named Warren Beatty. They met at a party, talked for hours, listened to music, and walked along the beach together under the night sky. It felt light, almost hopeful, like a quiet moment of peace after years of turbulence. The next day, she was dead. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found in her Brentwood home, lying in her bed, with a telephone still in her hand. She was 36 years old. The official ruling was a probable suicide caused by a barbiturate overdose, but the circumstances surrounding her death were unusual enough that questions, doubts, and alternative theories have never fully disappeared. What they found in Marilyn Monroe's Brentwood home leaves fans shocked. The revelations surrounding Marilyn Monroe's final years didn't end with her death. In fact, some of the most unsettling details surfaced a full decade later. In 1972, actress Veronica Hamill purchased Marilyn's former home. But to understand why that house carries so much weight, it helps to go back to the moment Marilyn first walked through its doors. In early 1962, fresh off her divorce from playwright Arthur Miller, Marilyn bought a modest Spanish-style home on Helena Drive for $75,000. It may not sound extraordinary by today's standards, but for Marilyn, it was a huge personal victory. This was the first home she had ever owned entirely on her own, without a husband or partner beside her. She reportedly paid half in cash and financed the rest, determined to finally claim a space that was hers alone. The house itself was a quiet, hacienda-style retreat tucked into the hills. Marilyn once described it as a fortress, a place where she believed she could shut out the noise, pressure, and expectations that followed her everywhere. To her, it wasn't just a house, it was a promise of peace. That promise was deeply personal. Marilyn was fascinated by a Latin phrase, cursum perficio, which means, "My journey ends here." She loved it so much that she had the words permanently carved into the tiles at the front of her home. In hindsight, the phrase feels almost unbearable in its symbolism. Marilyn's time there was heartbreakingly short. Just months after moving in, she was found dead inside the house in August 1962. She was only 36 years old. The home that was meant to be her sanctuary became the final chapter of her life. After her death, the property passed quietly through several owners. Then, years later, it landed in the hands of Veronica Hamill. While renovating the house, Hamill reportedly stumbled upon something that sent shockwaves through Hollywood lore: a hidden network of wiretaps embedded throughout the property. For years, rumors had swirled that Marilyn's home may have been bugged by powerful forces, ranging from government agencies to organized crime. The discovery seemed to breathe new life into those theories. While no official agency has ever confirmed involvement, the equipment appeared consistent with surveillance technology from the early 1960s, around the same time Marilyn was closely linked to President John F. Kennedy. Once again, her life and death slipped further into the shadows of unanswered questions. The house continued to attract notable owners over the decades. Film director Michael Ritchie purchased the property in 1994, though the timeline of its later ownership remains unclear. What is certain is that the mystique surrounding Marilyn never faded. her legacy only grew more valuable with time. That legacy has fetched astonishing sums at auction. The sparkling gown she wore while singing Happy Birthday to President Kennedy sold in 1999 for £820,000, setting a world record for a single piece of clothing. About 10 years later, she broke her own record when the famous white dress from the 7-Year Itch sold for £2.8 million. Even her furniture became treasured artifacts. Her white baby grand piano was eventually purchased by Mariah Carey for more than $662,000. By 2023, the house itself changed hands once again. It was purchased by a company called Glory of the Snow LLC and soon transferred into a trust under the same name. Almost immediately, permits were filed to demolish the property entirely. The reaction was swift and fierce. The Los Angeles City Council stepped in to halt the demolition, at least temporarily. During a press conference, Council Representative Stacey Segarra Bollinger condemned the move, accusing developers of erasing the city's history for profit and calling the proposed destruction disgraceful. The council went further, voting to formally consider the home for historical and cultural monument status. For a moment, it seemed like Marilyn's final refuge might finally be protected. But in true Hollywood fashion, the story took another turn. Rumors began circulating that the push to tear down the house didn't come from investors alone. Speculation pointed to the neighbors next door, who were allegedly interested in combining both properties to build a sprawling mega mansion. Those rumors gained traction when aerial footage revealed that the wall separating the two lots had already been removed. For now, Marilyn Monroe's home still stands. But whether it will be preserved as a piece of history or erased for luxury development remains an open question, hanging in the air like so many others tied to her life and legacy.